Thank you very much, Rafał. It's definitely a very uncommon opportunity and an uncommon situation for us to host you at our Warsaw office, which is just for personal reasons, I understand. But what a lovely surprise to be addressing you from the comfort of our headquarters together with Rafał. The format of this meeting is designed to be a masterclass. So please expect that I will not be covering a lot of general information. I will try to focus on one particular problem that I think our team has found a way of dealing with, and that is particularly salient to designing good government foresight, and, well, from our perspective, also to formulating on the government side requests for quotations or requests for offers that make sense and that make the best use of the capacities of foresight contractors that you may want to interact with. I will share my screen to show you some slides supporting my presentation. The main theme is guidebooks to the future, and I think there's many ways in which we could start the conversation, saying how every foresight project should be an actual guidebook to the future, but sometimes it feels like a bad choice of material, bad choice of reading. The first time I encountered this problem was, if I remember correctly, in 2014 during a conference organized by GRC of the European Commission called Future Technology Assessment. It was a series of conferences back then that happened every couple of years, and I attended a panel on the issues of bridging from foresight to policymaking, to decision-making, to government strategy. So the gap has long been recognized. Soon after, working with one of our clients, namely with the Dutch Ministry of Defense, I was faced with a practical example of this problem, where the client, Land Warfare Center of the Dutch Army, commissioned a foresight report on the future of land warfare, but then realized that once it was done, once it was finished, there was actually very little in the way of to use a physics metaphor, there were no electrons that could connect to the planning and programming process that the Army had, and the Army has been using for a very long time. And that was mandatory because since this is a significant technical and human resource effort, it's not that based on one piece of expertise or one report, they can re-engineer their planning and programming process for the force design and force building. So this is one very specific example of when we were asked to intervene in a situation where there was a gap between foresight and policy or strategy and government action. But such cases have transpired many, many times, and I've intervened in many such situations in a lot of different setups since like Rafał said, I've been in the field for almost 15 years, working with 4CF, the Futures Literacy Company, that in turn will soon be celebrating its 20 years of in business of foresight, working with public sector clients, but also with corporate clients. Now, what I will be advocating for is not a fully author individual concept. You will see that it refers to many existing frameworks, to many also existing pieces of scholarship, and I'm infinitely grateful to my friends and colleagues from all kinds of foresight networks around the world, ranging from the Millennium Project that we joined a long time ago, but also to the more recent, the ones that that were established and we joined more recently, like the World Economic Forum Global Foresight Group or the Dubai Future Foundation Global Future Society. So please, I will try to make specific references wherever due, but if I omit a reference to some concept, please forgive me, and I hope that the authors will understand. This is especially important since bridging the gap between futuring and action has also received some attention in scholarship. If you look at one of the most interesting foresight books published in the last decade, namely a strategic reframing by Rafael Ramirez and Angela Wilkinson that sets out the tenets, the principles of Oxford scenario planning approach, you will see that the way they came about this, the way that they propose, is to include the decision makers to a higher extent in scenario making processes. This is a good recommendation. We know that it would be useful, but does it happen? Not really, not as much as we would like it to happen. Participatory processes are usually more bent towards involving the larger public. Then it's sometimes easier to involve 100 citizens or 1,000 representatives of some community than to include one or two key decision makers who surely don't have time to be insiders in the foresight projects. So maybe there should be another way to go about it. Let's look at the root causes of the problem of the gap. There are, of course, differing time horizons. There's the issue of differing time horizons between the decision makers, who are often elected officials, and the foresight horizon. This issue has been discussed many, many times. I will not repeat very obvious issues related to electoral cycle and so on. There's the issue of a rather narrow futures literacy, which means that decision makers have a set of capacities, a capability to deal with the future. It's only a different kind of capability than the one that foresight provides. There's, of course, the issue that can be easily addressed of pure communication of actionable recommendations, but this is a recurrent thing where actually recommendations presented in foresight reports sometimes are vague, or sometimes just don't look very convincing faced with all the complexity and the level of challenge that the foresight reports present. But I think one of the more important reasons is just the mismatch between foresight studies and policy needs, which is also something that I referred to at the beginning. That is what is included in requests for quotations, requests for offers, in different calls, in the procurement tendering process. What we often see is that the unit in the government agency which issues the procurement notice will be quite specific about the kind of exercise they want to engage in. They will say that they would like a scenario exercise to happen and bring recommendations. They would say perhaps that what they are aiming at is a backcasting exercise, or maybe a horizon scan, or etc., etc. Sometimes looking at these references, one gets the impression, and the impression is sometimes confirmed then in practice, that the choice was based on the experience of the team, where they've participated in different foresight projects that used these different methodologies, and some seemed to work better, some were worse. It's natural to go towards something that seems to work, but it's not necessarily a way to provide a full guided tour to the future and back that results in recommendations, focusing on just one particular method. Some of these methods are so emblematic, they are almost synonymous with foresight. If we talk about scenarios, if we talk about Delphi, that sounds almost like the epitome of foresight. But does it really give the ability to do the full circle, to climb the mountain and discover some kind of relevant hypothesis about the futures and go back to the policy work and implement this? This happens rarely, and usually needs some kind of prothesis between the report and the actual results. And what I just described sometimes boils down to the so-called hammer and nail problem. When you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're already familiar in the complex and sometimes confusing world of foresight with one method that you liked, you would like to repeat it, which is sometimes not the best choice that can be made. Now, what I will be presenting in the next 10 minutes is a way of structuring, a very generic way of structuring foresight projects that increases the probability that you will have a blast doing it, but then you will also have actionable recommendations, and that you will have a structure of a project that supports good policy or good action conclusions. As the saying goes, good things come in threes. So when I will be presenting this framework, you will see that it's a very classical three-parted, very classical, three-component cycle, like a short story: exposition, development, and conclusion that usually holds the climax. There are many references to such intuitively, but also research endorsed three-parted processes all around management studies. If you look at Lewin's theory of change, that starts by unfreezing, then changes the system and refreezes it into a form that is solid. If you look further into history of philosophy, and you look at the dialectic model of Hegel, where that starts with the formulation of a thesis, then attacks the thesis with an antithesis, and arrives at a synthesis, then, of course, it's also a three-parted model, not the only one and not the only way to go about logical problems and reaching conclusions, but also showing that somehow the good things come in threes, and it's something that is easy to explain. The one particular paper that I'm referring the most is Real Miller's paper from 2007 about hybrid scenario methodology. I won't go into the details, but it's important that it was probably the first paper in which Dr. Miller presented what is now known as the generic framework for futures literacy labs. Is this presentation about futures literacy labs? No, it isn't. Nevertheless, the way that phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 were first presented in this 2007 paper authored by Real, if I remember correctly, during his time at Aarhus University, is still a very good approximation at a blueprint for a successful foresight project. The kind of successful foresight project, according to the criteria that I presented. So we're not necessarily looking at something that will be the wildest or the most provocative. We're not looking at something that will be the most participatory, but it's something that will be solid, of high quality, and will actually be actionable in your government context. Now, the generic framework, I present it here with expressly three different formulations, and they come from three different periods in which this three-parted framework was presented in different chapters and books, which is a journey from awareness through discovery to choice. That's the first formulation. It's not very evocative. So what is it really about? The colored boxes present the gist of this strategy, of this generic framework, that a foresight project should first strive to make assumptions of the decision maker and the stakeholders explicit. Then it should introduce model assumptions for the future that doesn't exist, since we cannot know anything about what will be the future. In an empirical way, we cannot tell what will be the future set of assumptions and what will be the future context for a given social problem or a given topic in the future. What we are using are model futures, model assumptions that are supposed to replace or attempt to replace the existing assumptions and extrapolations of the decision makers and stakeholders with something new, with something different. And then that's still not enough. The third phase is also necessary, the third phase that focuses on identifying novel outcomes. According to the latest formulation of this three-part description as used, we're using it here in a different context, but as it is used in the context of UNESCO Futures Literacy Laboratories, is the names that I've put on the bottom of the slide: reveal, reframe, and ask new questions. Now, what is really salient here, I think that the last formulation is really good, because revealing means the act of moving from tacit to explicit assumptions about the future. And many foresight projects stop right there. The moment that we've asked the experts, the moment when we had workshops or used different techniques to understand what we believe to be probable, desirable, or according to a different standard, we've identified this kind of assumptions about the future. Many projects stop there. Well, this is very counter foresight, because this is basically an inventory of forecasts. The reframing, so changing the context, playing with the set of assumptions that constitutes the anticipatory framing of the problem that we're talking, is absolutely essential. And many projects stop at this stage, where they have sort of ruffled feathers, where